Hello and welcome to Tiger Team with LPM. What is Tiger Team? Well, the goal of Tiger Team is to bring a range of legal business expertise to a legal business problem and to analyse and solve, to the extent that a business problem can be solved, that problem in a sprint. For this Tiger Team, we have a range of management leaders from a range of firm sizes put together to bring up solutions to a problem group in legal business today. We've got a rounded panel representing the large end of the LPM audience, a growing group containing smaller mid-market firms and a smaller, more focused firm. And I'm hoping that we will therefore be able to represent the whole LPM audience with Tiger Team. I'm Rupert Collins-White. I set up LPM back in 2014, which makes us around 7 years old now. So with us, we have three great people from the legal market and someone from our friends at Ashtons Legal. So we have Jacqueline Watts, who is Director, Head of Commercial Law at a city law firm, which is a roughly 20 headcount limited company firm. Joanna Kingston Davies, who's Group COO of the MAT Group, which is a multi-law firm group and a limited company. And perhaps she can tell us a couple of firms that they currently contain. And Edward O'Rourke, who's CEO at Ashtons Legal, which is a 300 plus headcount multi-site regional firm, which is a partnership. We also have legal tech expertise in the room in the guise of Lauren Colbeck, who's head of product at Ashtons Legal. So before we go much further, please, Lauren, sort of give us a quick hello from you. Thank you for supporting, opening up Tiger Team for us in the LPM brand. It's a delight to be starting it off.
Thanks very much, Rupert. I'm Lauren Colbeck. I'm the head of product at Ashtons Legal, as Rupert mentioned. I've been with Ashtons Legal now for just under 6 months, and I'm really excited to be part of the LPM Tiger Team today. Really looking forward to our conversation. Ashtons are always interested in hearing from legal leaders in legal businesses about the challenges they're facing and how they're approaching those challenges. Because as a technology provider, it really helps us understand what it is that we can do with our products and services to help be part of the solution to those challenges. So again, really excited to be here today.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. So before we get into asking the Tigers some questions, I should introduce, what does it mean that we're doing here with Tiger Team? So what we're going to do today, hopefully, is some how, and in the next half an hour, and we're going to try and get into the direction, which is how can firms rebuild themselves around their clients. Now, obviously, we can't just talk about that because it's an enormously wide-ranging subject. So we've boiled this down to a goal of generating more client centricity inside the business. And we've tried to understand what pain points exist behind, what barriers to that goal exist in law firms. So our problem statement for today is metrics and or data in law firms don't incorporate, relate to, or require qualitative understanding of client needs or satisfaction. That is our problem that we're going to try to solve. Our Tigers are here to help us to solve these, or give us some solutions, both in terms of what they have done and what we want them, what they might want to do if they were given a magic wand. One of the reasons we asked people to join us was because they have tried to solve this very sticky problem. So I'm going to try to walk around the Tiger room for just first time off and start with you, Jackie, if that's possible, and go, look, can you give us an idea, what's the kind of the most significant thing you think that you've done at a city law firm or the firm has done to kind of to try to deal with this problem that, ultimately the information being processed, how the law firm measures and understands information, the information doesn't contain enough about the client so that you can be more client centric.
So one of the things that we've done is we've established a client management department, so an effectively standalone department which looks to monitor and oversee client satisfaction and stay with the client, oversee really the client journey as they go through the process and understanding that. So being a port of call and being able to have a dialogue and a conversation with our clients, which is not just then measured on billable time or what the lawyers input into our case management systems in terms of their output, but really understanding what the pain points are for the client, what they're happy with, what they're not happy with, and a standalone team, which is not staffed by lawyers, not staffed by support team, their own standalone department itself, which they're not accountable by billing targets. It's like a customer service department really within our organisation.
So is that fundamentally you've instituted a client? Is that a client management department that you?
We call it client management department or client care department, and effectively, it's staffed by non-lawyers, because I think some of the issue here is that lawyers are part of the problem traditionally, because we're very used to, this is coming from a lawyer, we're very used to working on billable hours targets, which are driven by the number of hours that's taken to achieve something. Whereas in reality, it may be more efficient both for the firm itself and for the client for something to be handled faster, more effectively, or using other solutions. So one of the things internally, especially within my department, which is that dealing with commercial clients, is a recognition that legal tech isn't necessarily completely adverse to what we're trying to achieve. So trying to work with some other legal tech solutions, incorporating those in and saying, well, actually, where do we have the value add in terms of our services and the best price point for the client, so they can understand that together it may not be us or a document production or some sort of solution where they can get templated documents from, but actually working together to say, well, actually, it may be a combination of the two.
Okay, that's great. And I think it's going to lead us into something after we've done the round the room, which is nice. You mentioned something around there about the kind of the lawyers, the way that lawyers kind of see that how they, in a sense, operationally go about their work in terms of billing time, what have you, being part of the problem. And I think we can move it over to that. Edward, let's go to Ed next. Ed from Ashtons Legal. What's if you could pick one thing out of one solution that I think that you and the business have done that was a good solving to this, what would it be?
I think the one thing that we've done so far to date that's moving us in the right direction, we're not there yet as such, is probably engaging with what the Competition and Markets Authority call digital comparison tools. So for us, we use review solicitors, but there are others out there as well. And that's sort of trying to bring and using that, the data that we get from that as well as to measure performance. So I think law firms historically been very good, as Jackie's just mentioned earlier, very good at looking at data metrics based on internal looking metrics such as billable hours or recovery rates, etc. What we're doing now is making sure that our staff are being monitored and measured against their performance on the review solicitors' ratings as well. So bringing that external client perspective as to how we're performing into some of the data that we look at. So that's probably the one thing that we've done so far that is moving in that direction towards changing the data that we use and capturing more of a client perspective data.
So you've added sort of external business benchmarking into KPIs, really.
We have, yes. I mean, there's more to do in that regard. I think we could look at things like net promoter scores or mystery shoppers, which mystery shopping is something we also do, but I suggest we could do that better still. But there are other things to do. But yes, I think moving the fee earners and the firm away from this very inward-looking set of metrics towards the external metrics from a client perspective is the way to get this client centricity that we're talking about. You've got to look at things from a client's view if you're going to be client centric. If you're looking at it purely from the business's perspective, you may not be having the client's interests at heart.
Okay, so hopefully I like that. Thank you. And I think we're going to try and get into the how of this, because it's it's how it gets done, how you make it stick, how you make it land in the business and stay there. That's the most important bit, I think. Joanna, give me one thing that you've done towards trying to solve this.
So, like Jackie, we have now a client experience team which deals with end-to-end client experience through our Chief Client Experience and Marketing Officer. And that largely came on the back of something that we did that's not one thing, but I suppose a few of us did it, which was to be that client that Ed just spoke about. So when you see it, when you are the client and you see it through the client's shoes, we found that actually a lot of the milestones that the lawyers talk about are completely and utterly irrelevant to the client and to what the client was thinking at any one time. So it made us think, actually, when we pull all this together, that doesn't really make sense to us in the client's shoes. So that's why we went for that client experience and welcome team. And actually, I think what was really helpful to us in that was creating what happens next guides for our clients. So creating something very visual, because we'd been clients and understood what milestones were important for clients as opposed to us within the business, so that clients can really understand it. And that helped us to move and to start shifting that culture and that ethos towards the way we approach clients by living and breathing in their shoes effectively.
Okay. Hopefully we're going to get more into this from my perspective about why we keep using this funny word client, when in fact a lot of this is for me is really about the idea of maybe we just don't, law firms just need to see, sort of their clients as customers a bit more. And if you think of them as a customer, would you treat them differently? I'm sure that would be bringing some people out in hives, most of the lawyer community. But let's just move quickly. So Lauren, can you give me the perspective? I'm not asking you only to talk from the perspective of technology. Tech firms don't just do tech. They also have to understand how the law firm works and the people side of it. But what is, Jackie mentioned the idea of it's not just about technology that helps do this. From your perspective, what's a big sort of a solution that you've seen delivered that kind of helps to change this problem of that the metrics and data in law firms just don't relate to the client?
So I think from speaking to different firms, I think that one of the things that stands out is it isn't just about technology. Technology is just a piece of it. It's about the processes. So having that understanding of what it is that you're trying to achieve, and certainly technology can help to facilitate that, making sure that you're able to, surface the right information at the right time to monitor your progress on how you're doing things. But really, it comes down to understanding that there's a process change, sometimes a change in mentality that needs to come along with this in order to make best use of achieving that goal with the information you've got and those processes. So it's the ones who really get behind a mindset shift and start to kind of think about, this is something we absolutely want to achieve. We're going to do everything in our power to do that from a process point of view, but also then, what do we need our solutions to look like from a software and technology and data perspective to help us do that as effectively as possible.
Just thinking about the technology side of that, actually, it is one of the problems that law firms have. They often have an inability to to corral data from multiple places into a kind of view. That I think that one of the Tigers did feed back to me in our sort of solutions in a pre-event that it's the data. I think it was you, Joanna. The idea that the data's outputs are all very well here, but it depends what's going to go into it, and also depends. We all know that measurement depends on what you ask to measure. So if you ask to measure stuff that's still inward-looking, then you're just going to get reports that tell you how great you are at being inward-looking. But is there a problem? Is part of this problem the idea of getting data from different sources, or is actually the problem more human, that it's a bias problem, and we should be looking at different sort of outcomes that we're trying to see? That's for you, Lauren. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's a bit of both. It's a little bit chicken and egg, because I think it's really hard to change your processes when the information and the tools you have don't necessarily give you what you need to be able to do that. So I think it is a little bit of both and getting a balance. I know that, we have heard that many firms do struggle with having data in disparate systems, disparate formats and locations. So being able to bring that together into one place to kind of help get an overall view is very helpful. But again, it also means that you need to have the right information there. So, one of the things that we've mentioned in this conversation earlier is that a lot of the metrics are very inward facing. When there are tools and information coming about the client experience, that really does help So it's about getting all of that information, all the right types of information, and then trying to create those in a central, easy to refer to location, I suppose. But also, again, as part of that process. So even if the information is there, if it's not used meaningfully and applied meaningfully to a measure of success, then it's just additional data, on a screen somewhere. So it's really about, bringing that to life by, creating measures, creating success measures to aim for, so that we can use the information to track them, but that they are just as important as those more inward-facing metrics too.
Well, ultimately, it's data. It's not knowledge, is it? Until you've really got something out of it. Okay, so we've got some. These are some outcomes that you've all instituted. Let's just dig under that. So, I want to talk about this element of clients. One of the things that I felt, Jackie, that you said that you'd done that also maps over to Joanna is in the rest of the world, what you've done is created a customer success unit. And it's interesting that in legal we call it, and I'm not trying to sort of say that in a sense you should call it that, but that is an established mode, and I'm sure you know that in other sectors. Customer success is something that's relatively recent in terms of it coalescing under that banner. How have you rolled? Can you give me an idea of how you got the business to get that sort of customer success information and feed it into the way that people measure, in a sense, the success of the lawyers working in the business?
So we're quite lucky in one regard, because we're a relatively small organisation, so we're able to work very closely with our client management team. And one thing that we insist upon is all of our trainees have to go through this client management department very early in their training contracts to understand some of the pain points that clients have. So to be essentially on the ground and speaking to clients from a different perspective. Because just touching on one of the points you said earlier regarding the term customer and client, where I think that it becomes quite difficult is that often as a lawyer, you have to have difficult conversations with clients, and the success of a deal, for example, it can't be measured, and the success of a deal can't always be measured on the deal being completed, because in some circumstances, the best outcome for your client is for them to walk away from the deal. So I think that actually from experience, where it's been quite good is to have the distinction between a client management department, someone who's able to understand maybe concerns of a client, to be able to feed back into the lawyers, but then enable the lawyers to retain the ability to have those difficult conversations with clients, which so I think often there is a bit of a disparity there.
So we're making the distinction in that sense between the idea of a customer having a completed process as opposed to a client, where you might be advising them and the outcome is unknown. It's multiple. So having multiple possible outcomes for that.
But one of the issues that I find with this in particular is that clients, customers, however you want to term it, they don't necessarily understand the role of the lawyer in that regard, is to be advising them and to be trying to look out for their best interest, but not telling them what they have to do. So it's really part of this whole user journey, part of being client-centric for me, as well as empowering the clients to make their own decision, understanding what our role is as lawyers, and to have that feedback, which and for me, this whole client management department is having it as a standalone. They're there to make sure that the satisfaction that clients are being responded to, clients understand where they're at in the process, whereas their lawyers are the ones who are advising them, being able to have those difficult conversations with them.
So as part of that conversation that we're having there with our clients, I mean, ultimately, regardless of whether or not the clients, the journey, for example, towards a deal close is successful or not, ultimately there is still some sort of measurement of success. And often, actually, the problem with this notion that I may get to the end of this deal and I ask you to walk away, the way that the law firm may generate its revenue, for example, or what it does is by carrying out advice time. That's in chargeable time. But chargeable time, of course, is one of the big problems here, because ultimately, if I spend longer doing something in a law firm, and I'm not saying that any of the law firms involved in Tiger Team today do this, but the longer I spend doing something, the more successful I am. Now, that literally doesn't apply to any other job. We know that this is a problem. We've known it for years. Ed, can you give me an idea of how you might have gone about changing this idea of trying to stop all the performance metrics kind of being really inward looking, and handling this kind of, how have you rolled in? Give me a how you've rolled in some things that you're talking about, for example, benchmarking, NPS, review outside, into work being done, so it isn't always just about how many hours are being billed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big challenge. I think what we've done a lot of training, first of all, in the first instance, about perception and reality within our business. Lawyers are very good at looking at what they think is a good service. I don't know whether they still do it, but the Law Society many years ago used to produce a list of what lawyers rated as the top 10 things clients would rate as a good quality service. Then they'd ask clients the same question, and usually the lists were inverted of each other. So clients would always say, being proactive, returning my calls would be the top thing that clients would want, and the lawyers would always put that at the bottom of their list and put detailed, well worked out document at the top. So we've done a lot of training on perception and reality is the first instance. So it's a mindset change that we've had to deal with in the first instance. But what we're now doing is we're putting in place, in addition to rewarding people for good review solicitors ratings. So we have a discretionary bonus scheme. We tend to use that discretionary bonus scheme on the softer metrics, the review solicitors ratings. The other thing we've done is people coming up with good ideas, innovative ideas as to how to deliver services differently to clients. And there's a reward pot there for that. So identifying a way in which we process something at the moment and how we could then streamline that or make it more efficient, which is counterintuitive to some lawyers, because, of course, as you mentioned a minute ago, if I spend longer doing it, then actually my matter-related time looks good, my billing looks good, I get rewarded for that. And that's where I think this is a real cultural change. It's a shift in the way in which law firms and legal businesses think. Many lawyers have got their way to the top of a partnership tree, and they see that's the time to sit back and reap the rewards. And we in a business are now saying, well, hang on a second, stop looking at profits on an annualized basis. We want to look at the journey over the next 3 to 5 years. And where's that going to take us in terms of shifting towards a more client-focused experience? So some of the metrics we're putting in place now, as I say, it's a start of that journey, but that's where we're at. Okay,
that segues nicely for me over to you, Joanna. I hope this allows us to move straight into the idea of the stable table. If it does, I win a chocolate later.
It does.
Marvelous. Tell me how you have instituted this kind of some changes that change the metrics of that one, and hopefully relate it to that concept.
Yeah, so we implemented the concept of a stable table, which is basically a balanced scorecard in loose terms, which is that your table has to be stable. If it's wonky, the whole thing falls over. So the 4 legs of our stable table are people, client, quality, and profit. And the concept is that we look at data, that we benchmark, that we target against all 4 pillars, all 4 legs of the table, not just against the profit one. Because in balanced scorecard terms, I guess, financial metrics are an output of the others and what clients say about us. So like Ed, when we look at our client advocacy and net promoter scores, are all an output of the inputs that we've created. But picking up on Ed's point before about culture, that has to be really embedded. So it can't just be a fairly linear, superficial thing. So we look at it in terms of our data set, but it's embedded within individuals' roadmaps. So every individual within the business has a roadmap, which is our appraisal equivalent. So the roadmap is set up around those 4 pillars. Everybody has objectives and personal development plans around those 4 pillars. And our training academy is structured in terms of what we deliver through the different paths of learning around those 4 pillars. So what we do is very much embedded into the culture, and that's taken time to create. But I think having that approach of the stable table, and it's part of our sort of day-to-day lingo about the table being wonky, really helps us to keep that focus on the fact that, as you say, it's not just about financial output, because back to Jackie's point before, a client's result, the definition of success isn't necessarily a transaction and a fee at the end of it. It could be what the client said and what we achieved. And we're actually looking to take that a step further by looking at the B Corp concept, which is the concept of a triple bottom line. So a bottom line based on people, planet, and profit, not just a bottom line based on profit. So that's something we're looking at to take it a step further as well.
So some of these, Lauren, I just want to come to you next, because most technology solutions are obviously sort of there are many in the market. There's lots of commonalities here, but I mean, so you can only speak from Access's perspective, obviously, but they're all built really, I would propose, around this slightly more sort of straightforward corporate understanding of what data is in and comes out and what gets measured, and it's about operationally handling information in the business. Are some of the things that the Tigers are talking about here around, sort of feeding in other slightly more qual information, feeding other information into kind of into performance measurement like NPS or external sort of inputs, or this wider group of world in terms of B Corp stuff, in terms of this really perhaps non-numerical. I'm sure you can make it numerical, but fundamentally it's not coming from there. Is this easy to roll into law firm systems, or do they have to do some work about it? Is it something that the IT sort of software companies are going, look, it's already there, you just don't use it? Or does this require some work and some future thought?
I think it depends. There are options to bring things together, because, as you said, that a lot of times with each of the individual solutions that's gathering this type of information, there'll be out of the box or customized reporting specifically around the information in that particular ecosystem. It's when you want to start to blend those things that there's a number of ways that can be done. So there are options to integrate information into single analytics and insight solutions. That's something that we're looking at actively here at Access. And that can bring together information, not just the financial performance information, but again, this more qualitative information on feedback from clients, things that are coming from CRM and HR systems, for example, so that you can create that more holistic view in one place. But again, I think, depending on the firm, what they've got in place, how they're doing that today, there's a number of ways that technology can be used to help tackle that. And it's just about ensuring that you know where to find that information, you're getting the information that you want, everyone's taking it seriously, so the quality of the information is there, and bringing that together in application and how you use it.
Talking about the technology side of things, where we started here was we mentioned the idea of sort of how much tech can do for this. I'm just obviously the way that law firms traditionally have always measured what they do is by saying to people, you've got this much billable time you have to do, and a lot of the systems that have been brought into law firms in the last sort of 10-20 years have, why would they not be about this, is about creating more efficiency in the process of legal services delivery. And I just want to quickly have a few minutes of whether the Tigers, have you sort of encountered this issue, maybe that the journey to ultimate efficiency runs counter to client results, and there are moments when you go, well, actually, I'd like the efficiency, but done this way. I'd like, if you have an example of that, or if you have an example of where you've had to bend, in a sense, efficiency systems to kind of be more to have that more client-centric output. And I'm just going to ask any of the Tigers who would like to answer that, if you've got an answer for it. Otherwise, I'm just going to come to you and go, do you have an example of it?
Well, I can step in and start briefly, if you like. I think problem sometimes is technology can get in the way of that client focus. Technology is a great tool that can aid towards the goals that we're trying to achieve. But often the technological solutions that you need to put in place have to be, for efficiency reasons, a one-size-type-fits-all solution. And it gets very messy if you start saying, well, for this client, I want it to do X, and for this client, I want it to do Y, and for another client, I need it to do Z. It gets very messy. So I think technology, the problem sometimes is we look at technology as the answer to our problems and the solution, and actually it's a tool that we need to use. And that's where the good lawyer, I think, and the good people within the firms can understand the client, get to know the client better, and understand the client's needs, and then work with the client to utilize that technology for their purpose, but not necessarily have the technology push them through in a solution-driven process. And we are different to Amazon. I mean, Amazon is a great service, but you go onto their website and everything's there as you need it, etc. But legal solutions sometimes are a lot more complex than buying a pair of shoes on the internet.
I mean, we do LPM and our sister brand Briefing do an annual sort of journey into sort of technology and business strategy under the Frontiers brand. And one of the sort of the classic things is there we used to do a chart where it had efficiency, and where people would rate technology as efficiency versus competitiveness. For example, and if you're not competitive, if you're competitive, then in theory you're satisfying clients. Perhaps that doesn't always work. And I do remember speaking to lots of people, and they said, "Well, it's more about efficiency than it is about competitiveness." And you go, "Well, actually, if you don't think the efficiency can deliver competitiveness, then you should go and speak to Amazon, for example, or somewhere else." That's literally how they're going to do it. But yeah, obviously, they're not. This legal does have its differences depending on what you're delivering. I just wanted to say, obviously, Lauren, neither you nor we on the media side would say that's what technology companies say. I mean, one of the old classic things is you can buy a Ferrari and you can win races in it, or you can plow a farm. You can literally do both of these things. It doesn't mean that's what you're supposed to do with it. It does mean why you bought it. Does that resonate with you, Laura, about the idea of, ultimately you've got to go to law firms, and there's got to be this point of like, what are you trying to find out? Technology is not going to do it itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it is just one piece of the solution. So it needs to be able to assist, but you need to know what it needs to assist with. So it's not the answer, it's the help to get you the answer. And I think that, where it can add some efficiency to contribute towards more client centricity is where it's almost invisibly helping in the background. So where you may have multiple systems that you have information that would allow you to appreciate a more holistic view of the service you're providing to your client. If you don't have to enter that information multiple times into multiple systems, if those things can talk to each other, so, you create the information in one place and it feeds through, that's a sort of efficiency that I think does support the processes that lead to more client centricity. So it's about understanding, I think, those types of things where it can help the most.
Just to be talk about the idea of going to the idea of how not everyone's going to be, in working in law firms. People who own law firms, they're not always wild about, they would look at this and go, "Hey, I'm making 30%. We're making 30% a year. Why try harder?" And so the issue there is that it's not necessarily a business model that sucks. So the idea of trying to say, well, why should I be more client-centric? I am client-centric. That's all I do is deal with clients. It doesn't mean that you're being very client-centric. And also change-making happens in law firms fundamentally through consensus. I think often it does anyway. I just wondered whether I could go over to Joanna and go, I don't know if you have one. Do you have an example of how you've, be able to kind of drive consensus in terms of to adopt these kind of more sort of some of this other, information or these other perspectives to say, look, actually, this is how you should do business. And do you need the data first? Do you have to kind of construct this outcome first and say, look, if you put this other data in, this is the kind of shape of business that should be? Or is it about sort of selling the change before the information?
I think for me, it's probably both at the same time, and one doesn't come before the other. I think they have to very much run in tandem, and it's part of I think we've all alluded to culture change and doing things with people, not to people. So talking to people, educating on the sort of the benefits that it brings. I know we found in the past that we could have been really stung if we'd taken data purely on face value. Data tells a story, right? But the story that you choose to take from it is the story that you have in your head, and depending on who you are will depend on what story you choose to create. And it's very easy to see something on face value and take a conclusion from it. We had one where RFD looked at a piece of data and we'd seen it, and on face value, a department, a service line that was running at a gross margin of less than 10% for a good period of time, would tell us that we needed to take quite drastic action on that. And he actually said, whoa, hang on, you need to add a load more people in here, which was completely counterintuitive on the basis for us of what the data said. But actually, by so doing, we did listen to him and we did do what he suggested. It meant that cases got progressed more quickly. The impact on clients of that was wonderful because things were happening more quickly. And within 6 months, they went to a gross profit margin of over 40%. So that type of increase based on a story means for me that, you know, you have to run everything in tandem and make sure that the conversations and the approach to the data, to Lauren's point, is only as good as the information that's put in. And as well, the people who interpret it, and having a wide team looking at it from different angles, making sure that you're kind of taking the right conclusions from it.
It is the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, is it not? This is the issue that we have. Perhaps that's rather too old-fashioned. Perhaps we should say Instagram in, Instagram out for the modern age. We're going to pull this to an end. And the way we end Tiger Team is that I'm going to try and ask you. This is the one where everyone sucks their teeth a bit and go, look, if I gave you a magic wand, Tigers. And I could say, look, you can, regardless of what the problem would be, whether there are partners in the way or what have you, I'll give you a free solution. What would you do that you haven't yet done, or what would you improve that you have done to kind of change this kind of this idea that the information that law firms use to understand their success just doesn't incorporate enough client input? Let's start with you, Jackie.
So I think for me, it'd be the incorporation of much more focus groups with clients themselves. So incorporating clients within this journey and having, dedicated, just as you've mentioned, mystery shoppers, but having a focus group that would work and say, actually, what do they want to achieve from our specific service that we're delivering, and working with clients more on that.
Excellent. Well, it was. I think I'd love to have brought up the mystery shoppers, but that was actually Ed. So let's go to Ed and go. That's a lovely segue. Ed, what would you do that you haven't done, or improve that you have done, if we gave you the LPM magic wand?
I think picking up on a point I made earlier, and Joanna's also said, I think that cultural change piece. So I think what I would do, if I could. Would be to hide the internal metrics that law firms use from the fee earners, so the matter-related time and all that thing, and don't report that to them, but report back to them the external metrics, the client metrics, and start really building that genuine shift in attitudes towards a client-focused approach more fully. I think the problem sometimes is we have two sets of data which conflict. You report to your fee earners their matter-related time hours for the month or the year at the same time as other client-centric data, and there's a conflict and a battle there. So hiding all the management data from the fee earners, although I'm quite an open and transparent manager, so it's sort of slightly contradictory to my style, but hiding that data to help build that cultural shift would be what I'd do over a 3-year window.
That's really interesting. I think I'd be fascinated with follow up with after this session is to work out whether or not such a thing can be really meritocratic, because sometimes satisfaction might depend on what kind of work you're doing in the end. Joanna, let's come to you next. What would you do that you haven't done, or that you improve that you have done, to kind of change the way that information is processed in the firm to make it more client centric?
So I think to your point, Rupert, about client versus customer, I'd continue to look outwards a lot to other industries who deal with customers very frequently. I think we've reaped massive benefits already when we look at other industries that are absolutely customer centric, and continue to learn from them, because there's so much the legal sector can take from retail, hospitality, leisure, etc.
It's marvelous. Nice, pithy, concise. Thank you for that, Lauren. What if you could go into any law firm and say, look, just do this. If you did this, you wouldn't change everything. You wouldn't solve. We're not going to boil the ocean, but you'd make an actual. You would make a demonstrable or understandable change in how you use data in the firm to make it more client centric.
It's a tricky one because I think, it depends. There's so many different processes and tools, I guess, across firms. But I would say if they can identify what they've already got, in terms of the information they have, what they can do for those processes to get better quality information, and then just really focused on that piece so that everyone feels accountable and takes ownership of that kind of end goal and how they get there and the information required to do it. I think that would go a long way, so that regardless which tools or software solution is in place, if that information is key and really important, kept up to date, kept up to quality, with software obviously helping as much as possible to do that, I think it would make a big difference. Because often I think the challenge is the way that the information is today, it feels too much of a sea change to change the processes of capturing and using that. So if everyone could get on board with that shift to that focus, I think it would really help. And naturally out of that process and mindset change, I think more better efficient ways through software to support that would surface.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, we're at our time. Thank you very much to our Tigers in the room. It's the only time when Tigers should be in a room with you, by the way. That's the general motif here. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Jackie Watts, Director, Head of Commercial Law at a City law firm, Joanna Kingston Davies, who's Group COO of the MAP Group, Edward O'Rourke, CEO of Ashtons Legal, and Lauren Colbeck from our friends at Access Legal. Join us in the next few weeks for the first Tiger Team LPM webinar, where we'll be doing all of this but live to a waiting audience. Thank you for joining us, Tigers, and thank you for watching.